Hello and welcome to the webinar. Currently got 69 people viewing and the numbers are going up. So we're just going to give it a few minutes as we let people load. If you want to pop in the chat, you should have access to the chat. If you just want to say hello, say what your name is and where you're from today, be great to hear that. And whilst we wait, Alice, do you want to release the first poll? So we've got a couple of questions that you can answer if you'd like to. Just a couple of questions about you and how much you know about this webinar. It'd be great if you could fill that out if you've got a few minutes now. Just to let you know, yeah, you should see the poll. So we've got a couple of questions here. We've got, what's your favorite Amazon animal? So we've got a great selection there. My son absolutely loves Amazon animals. And we've got a big collection of little models of them. I think he would probably go for the jaguar. A little fun fact about jaguar, it's got twice the jaw strength as a lion. And the black caimans, which are like little crocodiles, little alligators, always get those confused. It can actually, instead of the alligator coming out of the water and getting the jaguar, it's the other way around. The jaguar will actually go into the water and pull out a caiman. I can see the numbers going up. I can see that the jaguar is winning, but just about, and the sloth is coming up in second place. How about others on the call? How about you, Tom? What's your favourite animal?
That's a tough one. I just saw that I couldn't vote on that. I feel a little bit excluded.
You can vote by voice.
I think the macaw. I have to go for the macaw, the arara, we call them here.
Ah.
And there are loads of araras in the Javari where we've worked a lot over the last few years since Dom and Bruno were killed, and they're such beautiful animals, and they fly in pairs above the canopy. So yeah, I think the arara.
Nice. Are they quite noisy animals? Can you hear them from
Yeah.
a distance, like howler
Yeah.
monkeys?
Yeah, they're very noisy, very loud squawk, but very elegant and so beautiful just to see them flying in twos
Lovely.
together. Yeah.
How about you, Daniela? Do you have a favorite Amazon animal?
I think I'll go for the classic and say jaguar,
Mm.
and just how magnificent it would be to be able to see one in the real flesh. Not that I have, but wouldn't that be amazing?
Magnificent and terrifying. Yes,
Indeed.
indeed. Greenpeace actually has an animatronic jaguar that we used on the Tesco campaign a while ago. But yeah, it's beautiful sort of movements, and yeah, it's really encapsulating. But it would be amazing to see one in real life. How about you, Alice? What's your favorite Amazon animal?
The sloth. I love sloths. I just love baby sloths. They're really cute.
Gotta love a sloth.
Yeah.
I'm going to close the voting now on the animals. Oh, there's more votes coming in. Lots more votes coming in. Okay, we've got about 130 people on the call. The votes are still coming in. The jaguar is just going to pip it. If you want to vote for a sloth in the last few minutes to pip it, but no, the jaguar and then the sloth. Actually, with the pink river dolphin coming in third. So yeah, thank you very much for doing the poll. It's great to know. It's great to know that. Know a bit more about what inspired you to join the webinar. Cool. Okay. Oh, I think I can share the results. There we go. Can you guys see that now? Can you see the winners? Yeah, the jaguar took it, just about. Okay. Stop the polls now. Okay, so the format of this, thank you very much for joining us. Just to say, we've got Q&As enabled, so you'll be able to, oh yeah, have we enabled the chat? Oh, actually, no, we don't have chat enabled, but we do have Q&As enabled. So you should be able to ask your questions in the Q&A, and we will bring those up and we'll have those answered as we go through. So I'm going to kick off with a bit of round of introductions. and then we'll get started with some questions. And we've got an hour, so we'll be finishing promptly at 2 o'clock. And there'll be questions after each section, so do pop those in the Q&A. So yeah, firstly, I'll say hello. I'm Tom. I work on the Global Amazon Campaign, long-time lover of the Amazon, and campaign on it against the industrial meat industry, and lots of other things like that. Pass over to Alice.
Hello, I'm Alice. I work in the fundraising team here at Greenpeace UK and a huge forest fan as well, supporting Tom. I will pass over to Daniela.
Thank you, Alice. My name is Daniela Montalto. I am a forest and food campaigner based in London at Greenpeace UK and currently working in our global campaign to confront the industrial agriculture complex and its impact on ecosystems and the climate. And I joined Greenpeace in Argentina over 2 decades ago. And since then, that's a long time, since then have been very much involved in exposing and fighting the conversion of ecosystems and social impacts and climate impact of, again, commodities driving deforestation in different parts of the world, and very closely with our colleagues in Brazil, particularly on cattle ranching and soy over there. Over to Tom.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning here in Rio. I'm Tom Phillips, the Guardian's Latin America correspondent. I'm based in Brazil, where I am today. I first set foot in the Amazon 25 years ago last month. And I've been working, it's a pleasure to be here with Greenpeace today. I've been working and reporting on Greenpeace's activities in the Amazon since 2007, when I did the first flyover in Mato Grosso state with their incredible pilot Fernando, who some of you may know, and most recently we have made a podcast called Missing in the Amazon about our dear friend Dom Phillips, the late Guardian journalist, and Bruno Pereira, who worked with him. And so we've been spending a lot of time in the Javari Valley region of the northwestern Amazon, which is a very important and still quite protected part of the region, where a lot of the different threats that the Amazon faces are sort of concentrated now. So thank you.
And sorry to say that Romulo from the Brazilian Greenpeace office is unable to join us. Romulo's got lots of experiences of working with local populations in the Manacor River area, also working with the Munduruku, stopping the Tapajós Dam that some of you may know about from a number of years ago. That was a brilliant victory. And also working with the Dene indigenous peoples as well. After 25 years of campaigning for their land, they a year or so ago they got the land demarcations to protect their ancestral lands. I'm going to kick off with some questions to Tom Phillips. Actually, no, I'll kick off with Danny. So yeah, Danny, tell us about some of the threats to the Amazon that you're encountering, and yeah, the threats that they pose, the companies that are doing that are causing the destruction. Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Well, historically, the biggest deforestation driver in the Amazon, and in the Brazilian Amazon in particular, has been cattle ranching and the industrial meat complex. The majority of the hectares that have been lost have been transformed into pasture land, and if Romulo was joining us, he would be probably adding details on, of course, the advance of illegal gold mining and mining in general, and how that has been terrible, of a terrible impact for indigenous communities, indigenous peoples, and have been devastating territories as well. I think at the moment there is a reason to focus on and look at it, particularly at the company that is the biggest one in the world in terms of meat production. The biggest meat company is and got started in Brazil, and it's called JBS. Many people would have not heard that name. However, it is very possible that they have been close to their products, as it does have quite a global reach at the moment. It's turned into, again, one of the biggest exporters, and it does have a presence in most continents. Despite perhaps many people not knowing the name, not being familiar with JBS, the company has one of the most outrageous history in relation to links to deforestation in the Amazon, labor abuses, corruption scandals, and greenhouse gas emissions. We have been exposing the role of cattle ranching overall, and increasingly of this company as it expanded and again got to the point of becoming the biggest meat company in the world today. Their greenhouse gas emissions, for example, rival those of entire countries, and a recent estimation that our colleagues in our Nordic office estimated that its methane emissions, its methane footprint, rival those of BP and Shell combined, for example, with methane being quite potent greenhouse gas emissions that is very much linked to livestock production, which is at the core of what JBS does. So we are here looking at a company that has a major footprint from wherever you look at it, and it's only set to continue to expand, and that is simply not compatible with reversing the biodiversity crisis we face, stopping deforestation in the Amazon, or preventing dangerous climate change. And so this is quite a focus of our work at the moment.
Yeah. And tell us more, Danny. So tell us what are Greenpeace doing? What's the movement doing to push back against JBS and the massive threat that they pose?
This year in particular, there was you might have seen that a lot of effort and opposition to this company actually managing to list shares in the New York Stock Exchange went on, and it is quite outrageous that a company with a history that JBS has managed to join the New York Stock Exchange, and in that way now access or have the potential to access further investments and capital to support this expansion plan that the company has. There is a strong opposition, I would say, in terms of continuing to bring up the reality of what this company brings to the table, really, despite what the company might say around sustainability or solving world hunger and feeding the world, etc. What investigation after investigation shows is that it's not more than greenwashing what this company promises, and there is a strong effort to continue to confront and expose what the reality is. And I think that as the company looks at expanding, which will inevitably risk expanding its footprint, organizations such as us and others will do whatever we can to prevent this from happening. It is very interesting to mention now that the company, as a result of listing shares in New York and a restructure attached to that, in a way of saying, has moved its headquarters to the Netherlands. So this is now a Dutch-based company, and as such, we will be making sure that it follows that corporate duties, and we have seen that companies with huge emission footprints and that risk adding to them might well be challenged by the Dutch courts. It's happening, for example, with oil giants. So we'll see what happens in that space.
Thank you, Danny. And we had a question from Cynthia as well. What about logging in the Amazon? I think what's clear when we've looked at the main causes of cattle ranching is the real bulk of the destruction, the clearing of forests, the burning of forests, and then ploughing through to make space for extensive cattle ranching. And then also the past threat of soya. Soya was a big destroyer of the Amazon. And the new, which is smaller, localized, but very damaging in the gold mining, the boom of gold mining. But logging is in there, but it's still, very small compared to the others.
Yeah, I would say that none of these threats have gone away, and logging remains a very important problem driving degradation, and it is the first step before land is eventually turned into pastures or agriculture. And we have campaigned for a long time and have been exposing how there is a strong network of systems that are in place and end up legalizing, in a way, the extraction of the illegal extraction of timber. This continues to be a problem. So it's also worth mentioning it, definitely. I'm sure Tom might have something to say about logging.
Yeah, Tom, should we pass over to you? What are the sort of threats that you've experienced? Obviously, you're out in Brazil. You've been often in the Amazon. You've got first-hand experience of being there and experiencing the threats. Tell us a bit about your experiences there.
Right. So I've been reporting on the Amazon since 2005, so 20 years now. And one of the first stories that I covered here was the murder of the American-Brazilian nun Dorothy Stang in Pará, which is a region that has a great deal of cattle ranching. And it's fascinating and very troubling traveling around the region and seeing these different threats. You know, Mato Grosso, it's been, when I was first there with Greenpeace Brazil in 2007, we were looking at soy. Dom has wrote extensively for The Guardian about JBS and Pará, where there was a great deal of cattle ranching. And over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of reporting in the Javari, where Dom Bruno disappeared, and also in the Yanomami indigenous territory towards the border with Colombia and Venezuela further north, where gold mining is a huge issue. So the Javari is particularly interesting because it is so remote, it's so far into the interior of Brazil that it's been so far relatively shielded from this historic 50-year march into the Amazon, which really began in the dictatorship in the late 60s and early 70s, when the dictatorship began building roads, moved into Rondônia, Pará. The 1980s was, in the words of the great British documentary maker Adrian Cowell, he called it the decade of destruction, because that was when those roads caused this huge explosion of devastation as companies from Southeast Brazil and banks came into the Amazon with tax breaks to involve themselves in cattle ranching. And the Javari is fascinating because it's been shielded because of its isolation and because of its large indigenous population. So there have been attempts in the 1980s to look at oil and gas exploration there. in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, Atalaya do Norte, which is the small town nearest the Javari, at one of the entrances to the indigenous territory, that was a logging hub. And then in the 1990s, the loggers who were operating within what became the indigenous territory were evicted when the land was demarcated, and it was effectively sealed off at the beginning of this century. And now you have a situation where you have this huge Portugal-sized chunk of pretty pristine rainforest protected by indigenous communities, but absolutely surrounded on all sides by pretty much all of the imaginable threats that different parts of the Amazon face. So on the north side, you have the risk from drug trafficking, organized crime, Colombia and Peru, also a little bit on the west. On the west, a lot of logging. On the east, you have gold mining barges that are moving up the rivers and along towards indigenous territory. And to the south of the Javari, so the very deep south of Amazon state towards Acre, which is another one of the Amazon states here, you now have, and I've just returned from a trip there in May, cattle ranchers starting to move up from very small river towns like Irunepe, which was our base when we were there. And you see, as we walked into the rainforest from south to north, we saw ranches, cattle, and then after about 50 kilometers, you come to the start of the rainforest, which is not by coincidence at all, right where the indigenous territory starts. But and there are people talking about roads being built to link those small towns. So there is the fear that without efforts to protect that region, its fate will end up being very similar to what you see in the extreme east of the Amazon in Pará, Maranhão. And I actually did a trip a few weeks after Dom and Bruno were killed with activists from the Javari, and we flew from for the far west to the far east of the Amazon. And a lot of the indigenous activists had never visited that region. And it was incredible to hear them describe what they'd seen from the window, just devastation, cattle ranches, regions that for decades had just been decimated by loggers. And they realized that, that potentially could be their future. We're only 50 years into this process, and something like 20-25% of the Amazon has been lost in that post-dictatorship period. So the Javari is really important. It's the new front line. It's one of the last great frontiers of protected areas that needs to be saved.
Thank you, Tom. We haven't gone into it much yet, so if you want to talk about it now, the Missing in the Amazon podcast that you put together, a very in-depth and emotive listen. We can pop a link in the chat. Tell us a bit about that, a bit about the background and what it was like working on it, and the people you worked on it with, and the experiences.
Sure. So, I mean, the story of the podcast is the story of Dom Phillips, our friend and colleague, and Bruno Pereira, a Brazilian indigenous expert he had worked with since 2018 when they went on a big expedition together in the Amazon. For me, the story, I worked very closely with Dom between 2017 and 2022. He was a reporter for The Guardian here in Brazil. And I was here in Rio, sat at my desk one Monday morning in June 2022, and had a call from an editor saying that our colleagues had gotten wind of the fact that Dom had gone missing during a trip in the Javari. A couple of days later, I flew up there and joined the search for Dom and Bruno on the Itaquai, which is one of the main rivers that runs into the Javari Valley Indigenous Territory, which is the second biggest territory in Brazil after the Yanomami territory. And we spent the following days taking part in the 10-day search for Dom and Bruno, which unfortunately ended in the discovery of their bodies. And they'd been ambushed on the Itaquai River as they came back from a reporting trip. And I spent a lot of time there at the time, and over the next 3 years, have done, maybe close to a dozen trips to the Amazon to research stories for The Guardian about what happened and why, about what Dom and Bruno were doing. And that sort of culminated in the launch of Missing in the Amazon, which is this 6-part Guardian podcast series that was released a few months ago, which looks at what they were doing, who they were, and what led them to risk their lives and what threats they faced. And I think one of the most impressive things, and a obviously very difficult story to tell, was working with the indigenous activists from Univaja, which is the indigenous association of the Javari. They have a group called EVU, EVU, which is the Univaja surveillance team, which was created a couple of years before Dom and Bruno went missing. Dom had been reporting on that group for his book, which was recently released. And they were the people who led the search for Dom and Bruno. They were the people who helped, ultimately played a key role in finding them and finding out what had happened to them, and hopefully at some point bringing those behind it to justice. And I've spent the last 3 years following that group, EVU, and their work on the rivers using technology, using patrols to try and gather information on the illegal gold miners, the loggers, the drug traffickers, the poachers, the illegal fishers who are moving into their territory illegally, pillaging fish and wildlife, destroying the forest, contaminating the rivers with mercury, and passing that information to authorities so that hopefully the authorities act. And that's been really inspiring. I was last with them in May, in the deep south of the Javari territory, with an indigenous group called the Kanamari, who are one of the peoples from the Javari. Yeah, and it's been absolutely inspiring to see how hard they work in such difficult conditions. I mean, to get to the last story we reported on them for the podcast, we trekked 50 kilometers from a small, very isolated town to the border of the indigenous territory, through farmland and jungle, which is quite hard enough when you're carrying a pen and a notebook, as I was, and a backpack. They were carrying 2 gigantic aluminium canoes on their shoulders. And when they got these canoes to the river, which we had to navigate down, many of them had these huge egg-sized lumps on their shoulders for just hours and hours of carting these boats through the jungle. So it's physically exhausting, it's dangerous. There are lots of snakes and I mean, we were talking about jaguars earlier, and jaguars won the poll, but the forest we were in, there were many jaguars, and some of our team had been attacked by them. So I was quite pleased that I didn't see one. But it's amazing, and it's amazing to see how their work is paying off. Yeah, so it's been a very difficult few years reporting on Dom's murder, but it's also been very, very inspiring seeing how they've responded to it by intensifying their work, and how the world has responded to it by supporting, offering more support to their work.
And you cover this in the podcast, but can you tell us a bit more, what it's like being in the Amazon, being on the boats? Like, these are in the spaces it covers is hard for us to imagine, especially living in towns or even countryside. It's so enormous. You can travel for hours without seeing anyone. And you describe the thickness of the brambles coming off into the boats and stuff. Yeah, give us a feeling and the feelings of what it's like being in the Amazon.
Well, I mean, on this last trip, it can be tough. It's at once just an absolutely sort of gut-wrenchingly emotional experience, just incredible to be right at the heart of this vast ecosystem with so much nature around you. The area that we were moving through, even though the journey was outside official indigenous territory, is an area where you have uncontacted peoples, indigenous communities living in voluntary isolation. So there was also the constant worry that we might encounter some of these folk as we moved along the river. very, very treacherous. I mean, the Igarapé, which is a small river that we went down to complete our journey for a couple of days, is extraordinarily winding, completely blocked by large trees that have fallen over during storms from either side. So the Indigenous team were constantly using a chainsaw to cut the way through these fallen trees so that we could continue and they could deliver the boats to the base that they're building to keep outsiders out. And every now and again, we'd pass these Indigenous camps that they use when they come the other direction towards town in their canoes, a journey that takes weeks and weeks, and they'll camp out. I remember once, bizarrely, we just saw an umbrella hanging from a tree in the middle of nowhere. And so, I mean, yeah, awe-inspiring, but also very difficult. I mean, after 50 kilometers, my left leg stopped working. I really hurt my knee, as those who've listened to the last episode of the podcast will know. And 4 months later, I'm still doing physiotherapy and wearing sandals because my legs really took a battering in a 100-kilometer march through the forest. But just an amazing privilege. I mean, absolutely the best thing about my job. And I know that Dom felt the same, and I suspect many colleagues here do. The most incredible thing about being a correspondent in Brazil is to have this immense privilege of covering the Amazon, flying over it, getting down into it, meeting the people, so many different peoples there, and seeing this huge and diverse and important region, and sometimes sloths.
Nice. Yeah, that definitely came across was Dom and Bruno's real passion for the Amazon and for the people that live there, and the friends that they made along their journey. They were really two inspiring people with a long. You talk about the long legacy that they've created there, and all the people that they've influenced. I'm going to move us back to questions back to you now, Danny, if that's okay. So yeah, tell us a bit more about what you see the future of JBS. Like we've talked a bit about expansion plans. Like, what do you think their plans are for the future, and the sort of systems that are supported by them or support them, like the banks and yeah.
Definitely. I just want to touch on something that Tom mentioned, because of my first times in the Amazon was at the time that Dorothy had been killed. So just to reflect on that, because it was at the times very, very shocking and sad moment, and it is a constant, of course, pattern to see this level of violence, often coupled with impunity, and everyone that has been working in the Amazon and in other regions as well, of course, earth defenders, or community leaders and defenders are often at a huge personal risk, and it is something really worth mentioning. So I think in light of that, looking ahead, I also want to pick up on the fact that we have been exposing the impact of cattle ranching and the big companies behind this business for over 15 years. Like in 2009, Greenpeace International published "Slaughtering the Amazon," which was the kind of kick-off investigation showing specific links between the main slaughterhouses and, again, illegal cattle ranching, deforestation for cattle, slave labor, and so on. And very soon after that, commitment came together from the biggest slaughterhouses, 4 at that time, JBS one of them, to phase out deforestation from their supply chains in the space of 2 years. So by 2011, the problem that still, of course, continues was meant to be resolved. JBS has since been breaking promises and pushing the goals and targets to be dealt with, and then at some time in the future. Most recently, we exposed that the 2020 to begin with, the 2025 targets to phase out deforestation, Amazon deforestation from their supply chains is also very much not on track to be met, and scandals and exposés continue to pile up. So when we look at the future, what we learn from what JBS has done so far in terms of breaking promises, the pattern and the business model that the company runs is one that is based on broken promises. And it's an empire that has been built on, again, a history of wrongdoings and even corruption scandals that those at the very top of the company have been exposed and have admitted to be part of. So the future doesn't look very good when the company is promising to expand further and delivery and increase in meat production, and most recently the biggest new project, let's say, that the company is promising on and publicly sort of building its pitch to investors is a 2.5 billion investment in Nigeria. And so what we can see is that this predatory business model that's taken the company to this point is likely, it's potentially to be replicated if the company is allowed to do that. The emissions, the nature exploitation that comes attached to continuing to grow livestock production is again not compatible with us trying to secure a planet that we can live in, and a food system that can actually take the impact that already climate change is bringing on food production, and this cannot continue to happen. What we're working for is, of course, an end to deforestation, which the corporate sector and governments have promised many times in the past, and looking ahead at the COP summit, the climate summit that is to happen in Belém later in the year, we would very much expect and hope and push for governments to agree on very concrete steps and a plan to end deforestation, because we depend on this. And in terms of...
That's one of the questions, Daniel, that's coming up, Tom, is there space for hope? Like, deforestation is a long story, and we find this a lot about Greenpeace. Like, when I was a kid in school, I was probably like 6 or 7, there were people coming and did a theatrical production with chainsaws and deforestation. It may have even been Greenpeace. I just remember this when I was in primary school. And we're still talking about deforestation. We're still talking about broken promises. And so that's the question, like, is there hope? I think what we see this year, the United Nations COP30 is going to be held in Brazil, in Belém, on the edge of the Amazon. The forests will be very present. and it will be in people's minds. Greenpeace, potentially, we have a small research plane. We're doing some media trips at the moment, and I think around COP we might be doing some more to get journalists out into the Amazon so they can really see it and feel it, just as Tom has. But that's the hope, is that we can push our world leaders to enact, stop deforestation, to protect forests and implement the tools that they already have. Because there is a feeling that a lot of these businesses are set up to profit from the destruction. And even though there's been promises in the past, and some things have changed, it needs to come from top down. It needs to come from a global agreement, just as we have on the oceans. Alice has worked a lot on the oceans work and the Global Oceans Treaty, and it's that idea we need that global agreement from leaders. But yeah, Tom and Daniela, like, space for hope. Like, where do you find hope in these situations? Where do you see that and feel it? Maybe Tom first, and then Daniela.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Is there hope? Yeah, of course. And I see a few people in the questions also kind of asking how things have developed under Lula and whether they're better than they were. I guess the perspective I can offer is this. So I've covered Brazil for 20 years, but I was away in China where I was correspondent for 6 years, and then I came back here in 2018. So I moved back to Brazil during the presidential campaign of 2018, which Bolsonaro ultimately won. And then I covered his 4-year administration alongside Dom. And I've covered since then Lula's administration. A lot of our work has been in the Amazon. I think it's worth remembering just how dire those 4 years under Bolsonaro were, from 2019 to the end of 2022. We spent a lot of time in the Amazon. He was very hostile to indigenous rights, the environment. I met him on the campaign trail in Roraima in a hotel, I remember, in 2018. And he said to me, and I threw him a very softball question. I said, if you're elected, what will you do on day one? Just to sort of see what he would say. And he absolutely went for my jugular and launched into this nationalist rant saying, "Oh, you're English, you must work for WWF. Well, if I'm president, I'm just going to kick you all of your pesky NGOs." He didn't mention Greenpeace, but I'm pretty sure that you lot were on the naughty list too. Deforestation soared, violence soared, and it created this real climate of violence towards environmentalists, indigenous activists, and also us journalists in the Amazon, where it had always been difficult. I remember when I first started reporting on Greenpeace Brazil nearly 20 years ago, in Manaus, the headquarters had bulletproof glass because of threats against Greenpeace activists there, but got so much worse in those 4 years. So Lula takes power, wins the 2022 election by a very thin margin, takes power. And after a period in which IBAMA, the environmental agency, had been absolutely dismantled, FUNAI, the indigenous agency, likewise, their officials had even been banned from talking to journalists during the Bolsonaro years. In February 2023, I did my first journey back to the Amazon under Lula's administration, with environmental special forces into Yanomami, where they were starting this big crackdown on gold mining. And I think, you have to give Lula's government and Lula personally credit. A lot has been done. Environmental officials who were effectively told they couldn't operate under Bolsonaro have been empowered. They have had more funding, although not enough. And they have had a real impact in places like the Yanomami territory, Kayapor regions. Most recently, there have been a lot of operations and a lot of good work has been done, and deforestation has fallen under Marina Silva, the environment minister. At the same time, is everything perfect? No. There's a lot of concern about plans for oil exploration around the mouth of the Amazon River. There's a lot of legislation that is currently going through a very conservative Congress that is very negative, will have very negative impacts for the environment and for indigenous rights. And next year we have a presidential election here in next October. And, next week Bolsonaro is going on trial. He will probably be convicted and jailed, or at least put under house arrest. But polls show it's going to be a very tight election, and it is absolutely within the realms of possibility that by the beginning of 27, Brazil has another right-wing Bolsonaro ally as president, possibly even someone with the surname Bolsonaro. So yeah, have things improved under Lula? I think in many ways they have. Although of course there are huge concerns. There's another road in the Amazon, for example, that they're talking about paving. There are lots of, it's not perfect by any means. But are we now living through, the calm before another terrible storm of environmental destruction that would start under a right-wing president in a year and a half? Quite possibly we are, yeah. Which is what makes the work of the indigenous activists in places like the Javari, Evo, absolutely crucial, because their idea that their reason for existing is that if the government is not going to protect us, we'll do it ourselves, and that's true under a left-wing, reasonably pro-environment government like Lula's, but it even more true under a right or far right Bolsonaro style government, which is utterly hostile to the environment and the Amazon and the people who live there.
And this is what one of the main elements of our campaign this year, the Amazon campaign, is at COP demanding substantial funding for Indigenous peoples and local people, local communities in the Amazon, because they are the true solutions. And across all the three basins, whether it's the Congo or Papua in Indonesia, but investing the money in those communities. So there's something called a Tropical Forest Forever Fund, which countries will be able to put into, and the profits of which will go towards Indigenous peoples and local communities in countries that have those tropical forests, in order to protect them and keep them standing, in which we all benefit from healthy forests and a healthy planet. Danny, where do you find hope in this situation? Obviously, being a forest campaigner, as you said, for many years, and having a real deep personal passion for this, where does your hope come from?
I think, Tom, there are so many examples, like real life examples of solutions, of how to do things in a way that we are not hurting ourselves, because ultimately that is the outcome of predatory and destructive production of whatever it is, whether it is food or extraction of minerals, or logging or oil exploitation. We see with Indigenous peoples that from the courage to the way they have protected their territories to date, that's where the hope comes from. And I think that in the last years, in particular, just to talk about Brazil, and building on what Tom was saying, we have seen also the increased participation of Indigenous leaders, even coming into the Congress government, and there are big battles that are happening there, and it is very inspiring to see Indigenous leaders, take a stand, and despite everything that every attack that they face, whether it's on the ground or at Congress itself, and we can talk about just the intention of the agricultural sort of lobby to remove environmental licensing, the different attacks on the soya moratorium. You do have still the resistance, and hopefully the representation of Indigenous leaders at COP to really put their way of life and their proposals at the center of the discussions. I think this is what we all hope for this COP in Belém.
Absolutely. Something that Greenpeace is working with Indigenous peoples this month, actually, around the 20th, is a forest defenders camp. So we have 100 Indigenous communities, youth representatives coming from the 3 basins. So from the Amazon, from the Congo, from Papua. They're meeting in Indonesia to sort of unite and strengthen their voices and build them up. Greenpeace are working with them to help organize the camp. We also have going on at the moment, they're in Paris today, actually, a group called APIBE from Brazil has a number of Indigenous peoples representatives coming over to Europe. And we are going to a number of European cities, and there are press conferences and potentially meetings with politicians, telling the stories and warming the leaders of these countries that have massive sway at COP in order to get that protection when they meet in November. So there's some giant Amazonia letters that are touring Europe and popping up in capital cities as a focus point to tell this story. So that's going on. That's going on today in Paris right now. We've got about 8 minutes left of the session. And I just thought I would take a few more questions. So we've been filtering them in as we go, but a few more. There was a question around JBS, and you mentioned, Danny, that some of their products might appear in supermarkets and restaurants. So I know there's a couple of companies that they own in the UK. They own lots of subsidiary companies, lots of the meat processing companies. Where would this meat be appearing? Like where would people encounter it in supermarkets and restaurants?
It's a great question, Tom, and I think that through the subsidiaries that have a presence here in the UK, it is very likely that a lot of the poultry, for example, that you find in supermarket shelves has been produced by JBS subsidiaries in the UK. Fast food companies would also be and have commercial relationships with JBS or JBS subsidiaries. So it is I think it's a company that has quite a spread, and again, it's a leading producer of chicken, pork, and in Brazil, beef, of course, a lot of which is exported, and there are some exports to the UK. So a question perhaps for retailers and supermarkets and fast food companies is whether they are still linked to JBS, and in what way. We have campaigned, as you were mentioning earlier, Tom, here in the UK for Tesco, for example, to break its ties with forest destroyers and JBS in particular, as Tesco being the biggest seller of industrial meat in this country, and unfortunately that is a problem that continues, and it is an issue, I think, worth mentioning as well, that there are no rules, there's no legislation in place in the UK to stop. This is an ongoing problem. There is no mechanisms to stop the imports of commodities that could risk coming in with deforestation. So there is a lot to do still in the UK to really cut ties with forest destroyers.
I popped a little link in the chat. You'll be able to see a JBS map that Greenpeace put together, mapping this incredible web of both the products going out and the finances coming in from around the world. Who's investing? Where are all those billions coming in from? From the UK, from America, from Brazil, from a number of different places. It's an incredible mapping. I think this is one of Greenpeace's skills and powers, is to gather all this information and bring it all together so you can see all the pieces of the puzzle. A lot of JBS's success comes from acting in the hidden spaces, whether it's in the buying cattle from the middle of the Amazon, or just having someone like Greenpeace to bring it all together and pull it all together and keep an eye on it and keep tracking. I think that's one of the powers of Greenpeace. Another question we had was around soya, and has soya expansion slowed down? I don't know who would like to take that question, maybe touching on the soya moratorium as well.
Should I go?
Yeah, go for it, Danny.
So I have the pleasure of saying I was part of the campaign and the investigation back in 2005 that exposed how the soya industry was becoming a leading driver at the time of deforestation in the Amazon. And that led to, soon after, companies coming together to agree on a moratorium on soya driving deforestation by basically stopping the trade of soya planted in newly deforested areas. And this was an initiative, a voluntary agreement of the sector that is still in place 20 years later. It has, through the years, proven to be effective in limiting deforestation, direct deforestation for soy, even though soya production took over more land in the Amazon during this time. So about, I don't have the exact figure, but we could probably look at least 8 million hectares being occupied with soy in the Amazon at the moment. However, very little has resulted in new deforestation. So it's a proven mechanism that has helped limit deforestation for soya. And in the last few years, in particularly, it's been under strong attack, particularly at the Congress in Brazil, where there's been different initiatives to overturn it, to stop it. And that is, a very recent issue. And I think that what we're seeing is attacks and back and forth. So that there is no permanent. This is what this shows is the need really to establish zero deforestation as a norm, and not only, of course, in the Amazon but beyond. And to show, on one hand, that there are solutions such as this, and then there is the need to have a corporate sector that delivers on its promises, and a government that follows through as well to deliver on their targets and commitments. We cannot continue to destroy the Amazon or other vital ecosystems to fill the pockets of greedy corporations.
Thank you, Danny. We are at time, so I'm going to do two things. Firstly, as a happy Amazon Day treat and a thank you, Alice can pop a link in the chat. We've got a discount code for our new Amazon t-shirt that we've created. Yasmin from Brazil, a designer, has designed this beautiful Amazon t-shirt. And there's a couple of different ranges. So we've got a 15% discount voucher as a thank you for coming to the webinar. And then I thought perhaps I could leave a final word with you, Tom. like a reason for hope, or something that you've taken from your from the journey you've been on with the Amazon that you could leave us with on this Amazon Day. And before you do that, just to say, this has been recorded, and it will be on YouTube shortly, sometime today or maybe Monday. And I think there'll be a follow-up email as well, that we'll pop the links in so you can find it if you've missed them. And also there might be a little bit of a poll at the end when we close, for you just to let us know how you found it. But yeah, Tom, if you want to give us something to close with, that'd be much appreciated. And a massive thank you to Daniela and Tom for coming, and everyone who has come and listened. We've had over 130 people here today, so it's been really good and a great way to celebrate the Amazon Rainforest Day. So yeah, over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. I think that 3 letters help capture why I feel hope. EVU, the Univaja, Equipe de Vigilância da Univaja, the Univaja surveillance team. From June 2022, when I spent all those days in the jungle with them looking for Dom and Bruno, I've just been in awe of their superhuman efforts to protect their land and to protect other parts of Brazil. It was incredible seeing them in the sun, in the rain, day and night, when the Bolsonaro government sent almost no help for days, no helicopters, no police, no search teams to look for Dom and Bruno. To see those men and women break their backs in the jungle, and to have followed them for the last 3 years to different parts of the Amazon, where they're now exporting their model to other indigenous communities, has been extraordinary, humbling, just has hammered home to me the importance of those communities. We all know that the parts of the Amazon that are best protected are the parts that are protected by indigenous people. So their work is so fundamental. It really gives me hope. I know it gave Dom huge hope too. That's why he was there. So thank you for tuning in. Please do read Dom's book, which was recently published in the UK, the US, and Brazil in Portuguese, if you can. Please, if you haven't listened to it, listen to the Guardian's podcast, Missing in the Amazon, which hopefully will answer some of the questions we haven't had time to answer today. And keep engaging with our journalism. I'm really proud of how our editors have thrown their weight behind our reporting of the Amazon in the last few years, particularly. So thank you for supporting that, those who do, and please do support us if you can, and find out more about EVU, because they are fantastic.
Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah.